Hello, welcome to the Portland State University Art and Social Practice Program's annual conference, Assembly 2021. Thanks so much for joining us. This year, our Social Practice Conference comes to you in the form of a live television station. What you are about to experience is not just your average Assembly conference. It's Assembly TV. Take a look at the official Assembly TV guide. Ooh, it's hard to see. I've got a background on. Anyway, it's on our website, and you can check out event listings, program descriptions, even a drawing contest and word search. And don't forget to read your social practice horoscope on page 26 for guidance on which events to attend. Shelby, would you mind putting the TV guide link in the chat? Yay, thank you. The TV guide is designed to help you organize your days around the events you want to attend. There are so many great events throughout this week. For example, you can look at the ads to see what strikes your fancy. Use the schedule pages to see what's on each day. And you can thumb through to find other bonus content. Mo, will you join me in talking about the look of the TV guide?
Well, yes, thank you, Laura. We were thinking about making a publication for this online event this year, and we realized that since we're doing Assembly TV, there's already TV guides. And one of our classmates, Deanna Cortes, has this collection of Peruvian TV guides that were very lighthearted and wonderful. And we thought that would be a great way to kind of join each other together and make something together that we could print and hold in our hands to add some levity to this experience. So we're very excited to offer this to you all. And thank you, Shelby Loomis, who just posted in the chat, for doing these beautiful illustrations. And we're very excited for all of you to join us and experience all of this week.
So we have a very limited stock of printed copies of these TV guides. So if you're interested in receiving one in the mail, you can email us at psuartandsocialpractice@gmail.com. We'll put a link in the chat so you don't have to just write that down right now. Or if you're Instagram savvy, you can send us a direct message. Also, see page 2 of the TV guide for details. We've got a great week of programming ahead of us. A boxing class, a plant show and tell, a bunny tour, and so much more. So tune in Monday through Friday, noon to 5 Pacific. If you're on the East Coast, that's 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. Each assembly event will be recorded and put up on our YouTube channel for you to enjoy over and over again. If you're new to Zoom, you can check out the link in the chat for a brief overview. And finally, a note about accessibility. Our opening talk this afternoon, as well as the daily graduate lectures, will have live ASL interpretation. If you plan to use ASL interpretation for these events, please join us in Zoom rather than on YouTube. Without further ado, I'm happy to present to you our first event of Assembly and of today. It's called Some Thoughts on Art and Social Practice, with two wonderful and important people in our lives as students and artists, Harrell Fletcher and Lisa Jarrett. Harrell is founder of the Art and Social Practice MFA concentration at Portland State University and a professor in the program. Lisa is Associate Professor of Community and Context Arts at Portland State University's School of Art and Design. Welcome, Harrell and Lisa, to Assembly 2021.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. That was a lovely introduction to Assembly and to the conversation that Harrell and I are going to have with y'all. Let's see. Is my volume okay, Amanda? All right, great. Hey, Harrell.
Hey, Lisa.
Where would you like to start? What are some thoughts you've been holding?
Well, yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts. I figured maybe we should start with like a little introduction to the program and Assembly. And as Laura mentioned, I started the program back in 2007. So we're in our 13th year here. Lisa and I have been collaborating together on a project with a lot of other folks, including Amanda Lee Evans, who's here, called Chaos Mocha, which is the King School Museum of Contemporary Art, which is sort of a large-scale, ongoing social practice project that the program is connected to in a public grade school where we've created a contemporary art museum. So Lisa and I have been doing that for, I think, going on 6 or 7 years. And starting this next fall, Lisa's going to take over for me while I'm on sabbatical, for my first sabbatical ever, after 17 years at PSU. And then in the future, Lisa and I are going to start to co-direct the MFA program. So we thought it would be a nice chance for both of us to be together for the introduction of Assembly, which I understand is the 8th one. I have trouble remembering these things, but so we've been doing this, and it's been evolving each year. It's had physical locations, the Portland Art Museum, spots all over Portland. And then last year was the first time we did it fully online. And then this year we were a little bit better prepared to be fully online. But we refer to it as a conference. It's not exactly a normal conference. And in some ways, I think it is the analog to what a normal MFA exhibition would be at the end of the school year. So this is a chance for artists within the program who do socially engaged projects to have a platform to present those projects or to create projects within this system, this online opportunity with a set of audience and possible participants. So that's what this is. And just quickly to say the reason I was interested in starting a social practice program, there were a couple of others starting up around the same time back then, and it seemed like a good idea to create a specific program where folks who are interested in social engagement, art and social engagement, could concentrate and look to reference points, precedents of artists' work and histories, and to have support that was focused around that kind of work, and that in some ways deprioritized the traditional studio gallery model. And so that's what we've been up to. That's also been an evolving process over all of these years. But I think it's for me, it's been exciting to watch and see how it's all developed. And I'm excited to hand it over to you, Lisa, next year to see what ways you're going to help evolve it as well. I know. Just as a quick question for you, I know that the first time you heard about it was when you were still in Montana, and you ran across an article, I think, that came out in the first year of the Art and Social Practice program. There was a conversation with the first set of students. So I'm wondering what your thoughts were then, and how where you're at now that you've jumped this far ahead and are fully involved with the program, about to direct it.
I love that question. That's exactly right. So I came to Portland State in 2013. So the first year of Assembly, although there had been sort of conference-like formats happening within the program prior to Assembly. But I first learned about the art and social practice program at PSU when I was in graduate school at the University of Montana in Missoula. And there was an article, I think it was in Art Journals, the CAA publication. And there's a photograph actually, I think still on your refrigerator that I first saw in that journal. And I didn't realize until we were having a meeting at your house for the MFA program, I was like, oh my goodness, this is that program. So it's actually really funny that the photograph is what like linked me back to like the memory, because the photograph was actually in, I think, the room that you're sitting in right now.
Yeah. We used to have classes here in my living room pretty often. Yeah.
Yeah. He was an infant, right? Like a little tiny one.
Yeah, she'd just been born a couple of months before. That's my daughter, who's 13 now.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's actually really interesting to think back to sort of encountering that article. When I read it, it was the first program of its kind I'd ever heard of. And it created this interesting, I remember talking to the person that I lived with at the time, my partner, and she and I were like, what is this program? We were both in grad school, but I was in a visual arts program. She's in a creative writing program. And we kind of started asking all these questions about, what is the difference between a traditional sort of studio arts-based program and a socially engaged or social practice program. So my questions about social practice started when I was in grad school, but in a context where there was really no dialogue or support for that kind of work directly. And so when I came to PSU as the DePriest faculty in 2013 and sort of started to realize that this was the place that I was really excited because I recognized that it was actually a chance to learn about this in a firsthand way. And then when you and I started collaborating on like kind of the early days of KS MoCA, as Harrell mentioned, that's the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. School Museum of Contemporary Art, with students that were in the graduate program at the time, it became an incubator for me to rethink how I framed a lot of my work even prior to arriving in Portland. So it's something that I think about a lot now with events like Assembly, because as most of you know, and for those of you that don't, I kind of have a foot in both, a foot on each side of the fence. I have a very active object-based studio practice. I have a very active social-based non-object-based practice at this point. So like with things like Assembly, and I just have to shout out to Shelby for these illustrations. Once again, they're fantastic. And also just, we have a TV guide now, y'all. With opportunities like Assembly to really come together annually and focus on the collaborative nature of the work that folks do in the program, and also give students and outside exterior participants so many opportunities to learn about each other's work in socially engaged ways, to me is really it's an important addition to the learning happening sort of throughout the academic year. So yeah, that first sort of contact with the program via what we would call like maybe tertiary audience experience via this reading, this article in Art Journal, really became honestly a bridge for me into something that's primary as opposed to primary, or, kind of 3 ways down on that channel. So I think it's just a really nice sort of introduction for me into the work. And it really provides a nice way for me to work with students who are entering the program from similar backgrounds. Whether those be studio-based art making, object-based backgrounds, or backgrounds completely outside of what we would think of as arts training within academia. And so I guess that's one other thing I would say, and it's actually a question I would have for you, Harrell. How have you thought about what the social practice program or social practice as a mode of working allows folks to do, and how does it allow people to participate in the arts that have not historically been involved with them?
Good question. Right. And in some ways, I guess I'd say, first I have to look to my own training as an artist. I was in an art program at a university, and then got my undergraduate degree from an art school, and then my graduate degree from an art school. And everything that I was being trained to do, I realized at some point was about making objects that could go into galleries so that hopefully somebody would buy them, and eventually maybe a museum collection. And that pretty quickly you start to sort of learn the dynamics of the art world, even if you're not living in New York or in Los Angeles where the real art worlds exist. From my experience of traveling around also and visiting other MFAs and in all over the place, that they're all sort of following this mode, which is around this what I call the studio gallery system. And I just wanted to be able to make work that didn't necessarily prioritize those two approaches. So one, the idea of the artist going off to a sort of sequestered place where they make objects, not exactly knowing what the context or audience will be, other than hopefully that it would be like a white box art world gallery kind of context. And so I liked the idea, and I was definitely influenced by my exposure to performance art and to various site-specific projects that I learned about, many of them from an art history teacher I had, Lydia Matthews, when I was at Humboldt State, so I was really fortunate that I had somebody that sort of turned me on to these other ways of working. And I realized, though, that they weren't being encouraged in the classes and the schools that I was at. And so I wanted to figure out how can you make work that is accessible to a broader public, and that would also allow that broader non-art world public to participate and have experiences like I was having as an artist, of making things, showing things, all of that kind of stuff. And so I was sort of patching together a bunch of precedents that I read about or heard from Lydia or other folks like that, and in my brain sort of just creating this this set that I was in a way like being mentored by or something. And so then I was beginning to create these kinds of projects early on, but before there was a term, art and social practice, and before there were any programs like that. So it felt a little bit like a lonely place out there trying to do this work within a context in which almost everybody else was working in this other way. And a lot of misunderstanding. I mean, some support along the way for sure too, but a lot of confusion, misunderstanding about what I was up to, whether I was actually an artist, those kinds of questions. And so, but I really liked the idea of broadening it to include people who wouldn't normally go to an art museum or an art gallery. And initially started doing projects in my own neighborhood in Oakland while I was still in graduate school, in collaboration with another artist, student from the graduate school I was at, John Rubin. And so we began working together and doing all of our projects about people we met in the neighborhood who weren't artists, but were sort of doing interesting things in one way or another. And so I didn't think about it at the time, but I introduced this idea this year to the students of like documentary art. We're familiar with documentary photography or documentary film, but I think in some ways what I was trying to do was documentary art. And so at the time it was still largely contextualized in gallery spaces, but it was bringing in people, local people, to have the experience of being a part of that in the way that normally only artists would get to do that with. So for instance, we did a show about people's garage sales. And so their garage sale items would be shown in the gallery along with tags with the stories that they told us about those objects or why they were getting rid of them. And so we were just trying to, in a way, mess with the system, I guess, but also we were finding that we were just really interested in what we could encounter when we left the studio and started to actually explore the world, initially the world of our neighborhood. And then that broadened out as we got asked to do projects in Seattle and San Francisco and other places like that. And then eventually I just continued to do that on my own and collaborating with other people. But what I realized along the way too was that all of the artists that I knew, or most of the artists that I knew, a lot of the ones that I'd gone to school with, were all following this one mode of the gallery, the studio gallery mode. And so as a result, there is a scarcity of exhibition opportunities for artists when you're following just that mode. And so I saw that only very few people were actually exhibiting their work. And since that was sort of the goal of what everyone was supposedly doing, it felt like a problem that the majority of those people couldn't actually do the thing that they'd been trained to do and that they were desiring to do. at the same time, I started to realize that there were opportunities, exhibition opportunities, or what we started to call project opportunities all over the place. And so John Rubin and I started working as artists in residence at a middle school and getting paid by the state to do that, and doing projects in the school and in the neighborhood. And we started to think about how artists could function in society in a broader way than just in the gallery system, which I love the gallery system. There's a Ralph Pugai painting above me. I love paintings and all of these things too. I just wanted to sort of change the balance a little bit and create a greater idea of what was possible for artists if the gallery system wasn't the right fit for them. And it can be the right fit for people for sure, and that's great. And some people like you have hybrid practice, and that's great. But I just sort of wanted to, for myself and for others, expand the possibilities so that you didn't feel like that was your only potential outlet. And now I can kind of see, and like what we've done with KS Mocha and at Harriet Tubman Middle School, and with other folks that I've worked with, doing projects at Columbia River Correctional Institute, institution, a minimum security prison. Those are just a couple examples. And if you look at all of the projects students have done within the program, then you realize that you can do projects in parks and businesses and churches, and suddenly the world is open to you as a set of places where you can make work for and exhibit work, if that's what you're after, make projects for those kinds of contexts. And it just opens up the possibilities. And I think it also opens the potential for being sustained as an artist if you're not exclusively trying to do this one route.
Yeah, that stands out to me as a huge advantage or benefit of working in this way for artists, both from traditional art backgrounds, or artists within the MFA Art and Social Practice program who come from different sort of disciplinary interest places. This notion of limitations within what we'll call the gallery system, just for the ease of discussion and conversation. The limitations are not just those of scarcity in terms of quantity of locations, but then there's scarcity of opportunity based on the limitations of potentially the ideas in your work, your identity as an artist, and you don't have a lot of agency to sort of create or control or inform those spaces. And so one of the other sort of really interesting things about working in social practice, or using that as a methodology or mode of working, is that it does offer opportunities to create the spaces you'd like to see. And to do that, not always on your own, but more often than not in collaboration, either with other artists as project leaders or alongside your project participants. And so those are some other things that to me stand out as like important differentiations or important areas of focus that people might be attracted to when they're looking at or exploring an art and social practice program for graduate research. I was actually wanting to get a few of your thoughts that reach back to another conversation you and I had a few years ago on participatory education, which to me seems like a really sort of crucial or essential component of the program. So not just what becomes possible for artists who are participants in this program, but what the value is of participatory learning from a graduate level. There is, to me, a very clear differentiation between how that can function between a studio-based program or a social practice program. Are there any things that you've been thinking about either since that conversation you and I had? And I'm referring, for folks that don't know, I'm referring to a publication that was edited by Harrell and one of our alum, Molly Sherman. It's called Shaped by the People, Conversations on Participatory Education. Features some wonderful folks who have been either part of the program in some way, including some alum and some just other artists that we've worked with over the years. But this conversation made me think a lot about how we approach education within the program itself and the values of the participatory within pedagogy. And so I was just curious if you'd talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and maybe while I'm doing that, you could throw the PDF link into the...
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'll do that right now.
Just put the KS Mocha one in there so folks would be able to know more about what we're talking about. Yes, I think that's a really good question. And Interestingly, when we started the program, we were basically just using the template of the Studio MFA program, which still exists, the Studio MFA at PSU. And so instead of starting an entirely new program, we were just officially creating like a concentration, and it used exactly all of the same class structure, number of credits. We have a huge number of credits that we wound up with, 90 credits to graduate. And all of the conventions were there in place initially. The only thing that was different was the first set of students. There were 8 students in that first year in 2007, didn't get studios. But otherwise they were sort of taking the same classes, except I was teaching social practice within that to that group. But then they were taking the same classes with the studio folks for a lot of the other classes, the art history classes and pedagogy classes, etc. Over time, we eventually created versions of all of those classes that were social practice specific, and eventually were completely separate from the studio program. Interestingly, we're now sort of slowly merging back together a little bit, and we have a few shared classes, the pedagogy class, the professional practice class, and a couple of others that are shared now. And I think that over that amount of time, there's been an increased interest in socially engaged work from the studio perspective. And so that's in some ways allowed that to happen in a happy way that initially was sort of more problematic when social practice students were taking art history classes that never mentioned social practice, for instance. So that got flipped in a way, and now we're sort of moving in there. But so over time, what we had to do was, starting with this kind of template that existed already, was to sort of figure out what are the things that make sense for a socially engaged MFA program within this template, and what things need to be altered within the amount that we could alter them, which runs up against official PSU bureaucracy and those kinds of things. But it turned out there were a lot of ways we could change things. So we started by creating our own classes that, even though they were the same type of class, art history or pedagogy or professional practice, whatever, they were geared towards socially engaged work. And then along the way, we started having a remote component to the program. So about 10 years ago, we started integrating remote students who were in classes just like this. We were using Google Meet in the beginning, but so they would be in New York or Texas or San Francisco taking classes with the students at PSU. So instead of it being separate, like a low residency program, we call it flexible residency, and everyone was in the same classes together. It's just some of the students were online. That also allowed us to bring in instructors who were online. So we had people like Pablo Helguera and Shannon Jackson teaching classes in the program, even though they weren't in Portland. So that was an amazing opportunity. And initially, because there weren't so many people in Portland who were able to teach social practice, that was a great resource that we could tap into the broader set of people out there in the world because of the online component. Anyway, I'm getting a little off track here, but some of the things that we switched into it that I think that fit with what you're talking about, Lisa, with the sort of experiential education type approaches, is that, for instance, right away, the students themselves were a part of the process of selecting the next year's students. And so that sort of continued and been highly incorporated into the program, so that there is a class that includes the process of reviewing the admission applications, interviewing the applicants, and making the final selections. So the students, I do it with them. So there's 15 students at a time, 5 in each cohort year in the 3 years of the program. So there's 15 of them and one of me. So it doesn't, I can get outvoted very easily if there's students favoring a certain candidate that I'm not, or vice versa, or whatever. So the students really get a lot of agency on that. And I see it also as just a great educational opportunity, because they've been through this process from the other end. And so it's nice to see the other side of that. But then they're going to be back in their position of being an applicant when they're applying for a residency or a grant or all sorts of things like that, And I think it gives you a lot of insights to be on the side where you're doing the selecting and reviewing the work and seeing what works that way and what doesn't. So that's one feature that I think is really important. Another one is the organizing and development of this conference assembly, because it's something that the students largely do on their own. I'm sort of there in the background helping out and advising and referring to like things that have been tried in the past that worked or didn't work that sometimes people want to try again or not. But this is definitely like a student organized and run event. And so that's, I think, also a big part of the experience, the educational experience while being in the program, even though there are no grades attached to it. It's not an official educational part of the program in that sense, but it is part of the sort of culture of the program, is that you get to take part in that. There's been lots of other elements along the way, and I think one of them is that the students get to work with us at KS MoCA, and certain students have become really interested in that. And again, even though it doesn't have anything to do with grades, they've developed projects at KS MoCA and had the chance to do real world socially engaged projects that we can help support by having these platforms already in place and as ongoing, like KS MoCA or at Columbia River Correctional Institution, other places like that. And then relationships we have to places like the Hollywood Senior Center or PICA that students might want to do work with. And so instead of thinking, I think there maybe was a time in which the model was, as an MFA student, you just go into your studio for a couple of years and then emerge at the end ready to finally show your work. In our case, we're really, right from the start, wanting people to have actual real world experiences of making work, working on projects, collaborating, dealing with all kinds of systems and bureaucracies, and also thinking about how do you promote your work. All of those kinds of things are a big part of the program.
That makes me think a lot about the value of not just I guess it would fit into participatory or experiential learning. There's sort of, the official language about what you're learning and how you're learning it, courses, credits, grades, etc. And then there are these more informal or unofficial ways in which we learn. Traditionally, it's only the sort of official things that we value or that carry us forward. But what I've actually found personally is that it's the unofficial or the informal learning that has benefited me in much greater ways over time. So within the context of the program, the MFA in Art and Social Practice program, this idea of mentorship, which I think really runs through between folks in their first year versus folks in their third year, opportunities to connect with people sort of across different levels of experience or maybe accomplishment, however one wants to define that, to me I've seen those things be invaluable. When students go to approach writing grants, they tend to have a lot of work to show. They're not at this place of like, well, one day when I get a show good enough to actually write about on my CV, I can apply for this grant. Instead, I see those things happening kind of in real time, unofficially or informally, alongside the more official sort of criteria that marks moving through an MFA program. And for me, that's a really big contrast. I mean, maybe not for graduate school, but when I started graduate school, I had this fantasy as a studio artist, right? Yeah, I'm going to be in my studio all the time. And that was not what it was. I mean, I had 4 jobs and I was teaching, I was doing all these things. I was still never in my studio, which did prepare me for the complexity of working in higher education. But it was also kind of an unfortunate surprise. And I think that one of the nice things about the program here in Assembly in particular is that you really do get a sense of what happens, and what it looks like from the outside is actually very consistent with what it feels like on the inside. It's still a lot of work. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of energy. There's a lot of growing happening, and there are high expectations, but you're not just beholden to your faculty, for example. You're beholden to your project participants, to your cohort, to the program in certain senses, because the culture that we build is constantly getting sort of redeveloped and redesigned by the people that are part of the program with us. I'm smiling at Laura right now because I think we both had a similar undergraduate experience. We both went to art school in Rochester, New York at RIT. And Laura, I don't know about you, but there was no escaping the severity of that. Like you just like there was no room, right? You did it or you didn't, and you were in or you were out. So surviving it really felt like accomplishing something. But it's often made me think a lot about what it would mean to not just feel like I was surviving until I got out the other side, but what it could also feel like to thrive and learn so much actively, trying things on, succeeding, failing at other things, reconfiguring things, always having people to talk to about ideas, and being able to, try something that doesn't work out and then revisit that and make it better, and then share that learning with the people around you in your program. So it's really been interesting to sort of learn as I've been doing. And I think that's very much what this program asks of you to do, right? To learn while you're doing, not sort of wait for the doing until you have learned enough to do, in other words. So yeah, those are some really maybe nuanced things that it's fun for Harrell and I to talk about together. We talk, constantly, as you all could imagine, between collaborating on projects, teaching, running programs within our broader job at Portland State. But that's a conversation that comes up between us a lot. Like, how are we shifting? How are we responding? What's not working? What can be better? How do we kind of bring the next thing in? How do we breathe with a program that we really want to have a lot of breath and breadth, right? And so, yeah, I think to me, it speaks on a personal level to a lot of the limitations that I've encountered in the broader art world. And because my practice is so focused on identity politics broadly, how those things function and show up in all aspects of our lives, but very specifically and very directly within contemporary art practice, it's been incredibly beneficial for me as an artist to feel like I am also still growing, because when you do feel like you just kind of recognize all of the structure and then there's not really anything you can do to shift it, I think artistically that becomes really challenging. I am a person, I like to teach because I like to learn, and I like to teach in higher ed because it's the place where people come to learn. Within all of that, I wonder almost every day, I have a new question about how does what I'm doing inform and shape the way that I think as an artist, and how do I then sort of let that come back out into the conversations I get to have with people that are my oftentimes collaborators, but many times students as well. Or I'm looking in this room right now. I know everybody can't see everybody on screen, but I'm thinking about the glorious Amanda Lee Evans, who has been part of this project for so many years. As alum of the program as well as running our tech today, has started so many projects that have been inspired by the things she's been thinking in her own life and work, but also by the work that she's done in collaboration with us. And how important it is for both me and you, Harrell, I'll speak for you here too, to create these platforms for our student participants so that they have a place to start and begin their work that isn't always starting at the beginning. And that seems to be a shared value between the two of us. Harrell and I, as some of you know, we have really different personalities and different styles, but some of our shared values, I think, actually make the ways that we're different function well within trying to build something that makes sense for everybody that's part of our community. Yeah, so I don't know. Do you have any other questions for me? Are you laughing at me? This is TV. I love that this is a TV show. You guys are fulfilling my art fantasies, you know that, right? TV, billboards.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about what you were saying there, and then the example of Amanda is an interesting one, who is now about to go off and has a teaching job waiting for her at Whitman College in Walla Walla next year. And this is Amanda's sort of part of an ongoing list of alumni who leave the program and find part of their role as artists also as educators. And so I think that because education is a really big part of the program, including doing the work at KS MoCA, but also TA opportunities where people can teach classes at PSU, and starting recently, third year students have been able to design their own courses to teach at PSU as well. But we have a combination of students who've gone on to get tenure track jobs at universities, and also people who've decided to work at grade schools as art teachers, or with nonprofits or museum education, all sorts of different ways that this interest in education has sort of appeared, and is now we're sort of creating this, this set of alumni that are out there sort of with all of their different precedents that they're doing, and sort of and the fact that I think that for a lot of them, they're seeing that work as part of their practice as an artist, not separate from it, not as the thing that supports them as an artist, but is actually part of their practice, which can be supportive as well, and is great when it can do that, but isn't just the day job, but is instead a chance to see that opportunity of teaching at a university, at a grade school, in a nonprofit, where at a museum, wherever it happens to be, as a place where you can create projects, ongoing ones, or short-term ones, and see that as part of your work. So that's something I think that also is maybe a little different within this program than a traditional MFA program. And it was also something that I didn't necessarily predict, but over time, because it was a big interest of mine, and I know it's an interest of yours, but it's one that began to emerge, where the students would be coming up with projects that had educational components in them, and that they would be looking at educational theory as much as they might be looking at like art theory, to help them understand what kind of work they wanted to do as an artist.
I was thinking also about projects like Adam Carlin's project, Greensboro Project Space, and a project that is very much embedded and attached to what we would think of as like maybe a gallery or a museum model within higher education, loosely, that Adam took on as also a way that he sees his entire practice as a socially engaged artist. And lots of other folks that come in with a project or a kernel of a project that exists before the program, and while they're in the program, they use that as a way to either open up that work into different sort of spheres that maybe they haven't had a chance to think through it within. I'm thinking about Nolan Hansen right now. Carlos Reynoso is in that camp. Lots of folks. Even so it's really interesting to me to see how the work that you're already doing in a way can build a new kind of life or expand in a way that maybe you did not anticipate. I see that all the time with folks within our program, or Kimberly Sutherland would be another amazing example, and where maybe what they were looking for as they were researching graduate programs was not being met by traditional MFA programs. And so when you start asking the kinds of questions about how does my work fit, and where can my work go, and who do I want to be working with, it seems that for certain people that this program has answered that question in a way that other programs may not have been able to, because of the nature of the ways that learning happens within a setting like this, right? And so I'm really interested in that too, for folks who have been able to sort of see the migration of their work over the 3 years in the program, really understanding really where it was when they came and how it looks for them as they are kind of move out the door on the other side. The growth has always been so immense, and it's always so inspiring, I guess I would say, for me to understand the kind of commitment that it really takes to stick with something in that way, and to let people tear up the work that you've been doing, help you reconfigure it, help you find different opportunities to connect with more relevant folks, or bringing either art or education theory into something where it maybe previously did not exist. Transboxing is a great example of that, Nolan. That's what, having things like movement and performance and photography and documentation, and it's not that there's an absence of sculpture or drawing. It's not like we throw art out the window here. It's just understanding that what we're emphasizing within art practice is intentionally decentralizing this idea of sort of like the singular object-based expression of art, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. And one that I just remembered we should probably mention is that is going to be coming back up in this over the next few days is a new project that we tried this year that I think also fits in with this experiential education approach, which we're referring to as the $100 project. And so everyone in the program was given the opportunity to receive $100 with the idea that they would then commission somebody else and not necessarily an artist. Actually, people were encouraged to not necessarily think about artists, but to commission somebody to do something that could be framed as an artwork. And then to do an interview with that person about that process, about what they chose to do and what they thought about it, thinking about it as an artwork that is both the commission thing that they did might be something that they did on their own, or it might be something that they did sort of in collaboration with the student or with somebody else. And so it was, in a way, it gave everyone the chance to try out in a fairly small scale way. One of the ideas that I've been talking to students about that I refer to as like repositioning, where when an artist is given a resource, typically the way it would work and what we would understand for a studio-based artist is that if they're given an exhibition or they're given grant money or whatever it is, they're going to use it on their own work. And in this case, they're taking the resource, offering it to another person who might normally not ever have access to that kind of resource, art world resource. And then they're being able to support that person and that project that winds up coming out of it. But it's also a work that they're doing, a commissioning, repositioning work. And so there's sort of like a doubling effect by spreading the resource, in this case, the $100 out to another person, is that there winds up being sort of two projects, or even like from looking at it from a multi-authored approach, it could potentially have many authors and from different angles. And so it's something that we talk about a lot in the program, but I thought it would be interesting for people to have the opportunity to try it out in a practical way and see what the questions were, what the challenges were, all of those kinds of things. So we're going to be finding out more about that. And if folks look at the SOFA journal, which is also just released, it's an online journal that the program does. And this year it was focused entirely on interviews. So we have 3 each term, fall, winter, spring. The students produced interviews that went into the SOFA journal. All of those are available online. Actually, if somebody could throw that into the chat, that'd be great. And the latest one, all of the interviews are with the people that the students did commissions with, and so that they could sort of talk about this process and sort of work through it. So that's just another example of a kind of practical and experiential educational component of the program that's kind of different than a traditional one.
Yeah, and I guess we're kind of coming to the end of our time. I guess I would just finish that thought out with that's also true of Assembly. And so it's participatory in a lot of ways. It's really highlighting all of those different things. The same way the SOFA journal is focusing on interviews and this $100 project. I'm really excited to see how that turned out for folks and how those presentations come along. But Assembly is also intended to kind of mirror some of the things that Harrell and I are sharing in this introductory sort of opening conversation. And that it really is a platform to see and showcase work, but also to experience work directly. And so whether you're joining us on the YouTube live stream, whether you're part of the Zoom room with us, we really do hope that folks that are here feel welcome and that they feel like they can ask the questions they need to and participate. We are delighted to be at this point in the year. It's been a heck of a year, y'all. So we really appreciate the support. And I guess I will turn it back over to Laura.
Yeah, and I just want to say thanks, Lisa, for talking with me today. Thanks to all of the students who've put this together and to folks who have shown up to be audience today. And also thanks so much, Jake, for doing the ASL interpreting, which is really great new feature that hopefully we will have more of and that will be occurring for all of the grad lectures, which that's a new thing too, is just that this is the first assembly where all of the third year graduate lectures are a part of the assembly. And so each day there will be a different one. There's 5 graduating students, and each one will be doing their graduate lecture, and each one we will have the interpreting for as well. So thanks for that. And yeah, feel free to take it away, Laura.
Wow, thank you so much. I like listening to the two of you talk, especially about social practice, but maybe about everything. I'm not sure yet, probably. I don't know, maybe we could just take 2 minutes for questions. If anybody has a burning question, you're welcome to unmute yourself or even put it in the chat. It can be about social practice, the program, any of the projects that have come up, such as the $100 project, the grad lectures, assembly. Just looking at all your faces to see if anyone has a question brewing. I don't see anything. Well, you can always email us or put it in the chat. We'll go ahead and take our 10-minute break. Feel free to stay in the Zoom room, turn off your video, but please do return at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern for our next event, which is going to be quite awesome. I won't say too much about it. You can look in your TV guide. In the meantime, grab a snack or a drink and come back here in about 9 minutes.